This evening's reading is from week 21 from Swamiji's book, Rays of the One Light. The best way to worship. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhans Yogananda. In chapter 4 of the Gospel of St. John, the woman of Samaria asks Jesus, "Where is the best place to worship?" This question might be expanded to include, what is the best church? What is the best religion? Is it important to go on pilgrimage to holy shrines? What is the best ritual? What is the best mantra or prayer? Jesus cut across all such questioning with his reply. The hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. It was not that outer considerations of place, church, ritual, etc. are irrelevant. Each person should find those practices and observances which are compatible with his own nature, one might say with his own vibrations. Not everyone's natural path is the same. God sent different religions into the world to satisfy different human needs. The overarching concern, however, considering that the goal is to find God, is to include in one's worship daily inner communion with the Lord. God is silence. He must be sought, therefore, in inner silence. God is absolute love. He must be sought, therefore, in the silence of love. God is spirit, and thus immaterial. He must be sought above all in the expanding peace of deep meditation. Thus the Bhagavad Gita states in the 6th chapter, "Sequestered should he sit, steadfastly meditating, solitary, his thoughts controlled, his passions laid away, from every craving of possession, for possession freed." Wherever you are, whatever your outward beliefs and observances, seek God in the silence of your own soul. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Thank you, Aditya. And we have a reading now from Whispers from Eternity.
Its title is, "I want to feel Thee just behind the voice of my prayer." O Father, Thou art just behind my vision with which I see Thy beauty without. Thou art just behind my listening power with which I hear Thy voice in all creation. Thou art just behind my touch with which I feel Thy world. In the sweetness of flowers and in the zest of sustaining food lies hidden the essence of Thy being, Thine eternal sweetness. Thou art just behind the voice of my prayer. Thou art just behind the mind with which I pray. Thou art just behind my glistening feelings. Thou art just behind my thoughts. Thou art just behind my cravings for Thee. Thou art just behind my meditations. Thou art just behind the veil of nature's splendors. Thou art just behind the screen of my love. Behind all these mystic screens, reveal Thyself as Thou art.
Thank you. This reading this week is talking about how to commune, how to contact God, and it's in the inner silence. Many years ago, sometime around the 1990s, somebody came on a pilgrimage to India from part of Ananda, and a lot of Ananda people were coming on pilgrimage. And they did a slideshow of their pilgrimage. And it was extremely energetic, but also very rajasic. It was all the monkeys on the climbing, and it was all these babas with gigantic rudraksha beads and the colors of everything, and the sights and the scenes and all these kinds of things, and playing very, very loud music the whole time. This, chanting music, but extremely restless and strong and very, very loud. And right around this time, somebody asked Swami Kriyanandaji, what is the best way to experience India? And I think this person was asking, where do I go? What do I do? Where do I stay? All these things. Swamiji's answer was 4 words long. He said, with your eyes closed, is the way he put it. And I think for many Westerners who first come to India, probably with your ears closed and with your nose closed sometimes, because of just the senses being assaulted in so many ways. But what Swamiji was really saying was inside. Close your eyes, still your thoughts. When you go into that inner silence, then only can you truly understand God, other people, your own situations, all these things. About a week ago, only I think 10 days ago, as many of you know, the Pune monks, we moved our entire monastery, Aditya staying behind here to guide all of you. But 7 of us went to start a new monastery in Khandala, based on Swami Kriyanandaji's vision over many years of what he really wanted for a monastery. And it's just been, it seems like it's been a year since we've been there, because it's just been so much interesting things, progress, silence, among other things. One notable thing was that on the way there, Jamal and I, Brahmachari Jamal, we were ahead of the moving trucks, heading up there late Friday night after a long day of packing. And as we were driving up, we were just maybe 20, 30 minutes away. I just had this thought, and it was of Swami Kriyanandaji, and I prayed to him. And I remember that in many notable events of his life, rainbows appeared. And I was present at least 3 of those situations. And in 3 of those situations, it was in a completely clear sky. And in 2 of them, I actually, because I knew that this happened a lot around Swamiji, I started looking around, and I spied a rainbow just in a clear sky. So as we were driving up, I was thinking of Swamiji, and I thought, is there a rainbow around? And so I started looking around out through the windows of the car as we were driving, and there was no rainbow. So about 3 minutes later, and I wasn't disappointed, I was just playing. I think God was playing with me. And about 3 minutes later, Jamal, who was driving, said, there's a rainbow. And I didn't talk to him about this at all. I didn't tell him what I was doing. I didn't tell him what I was looking for. And I think there's a great blessing in what we're doing, and we're feeling it this week. And just we're doing many interesting sort of experiments of what Swamiji wanted. And one of them is being in silence more. And for me, I launched into this with a little trepidation because Master wanted his monks to have meals in silence. And I thought, well, maybe let's try maybe 1 meal a day in silence, because, 7 guys sitting around eating in silence and no sounds at all. I thought this is going to be a little bit awkward and strange. And I don't know why I thought that, because it's just the opposite. I think everyone's really enjoying sitting in silence and being still and just tuning in. And then I just remembered today something that Swamiji said. He said that when he was with the monks under Master, he said it's when they started spending time in silence, that's when they really started getting to know each other and tuning into each other, understanding each other, and going much deeper. So it's not just about us going deeper, it's about even tuning into other people, and experiment with this. I think if you have children, you can't say, okay, we're going to be in silence for the next 3 hours or whatever, but experiment with just being more silent, more inward, because we've seen the benefits. I'm seeing it already of just a stillness and a depth that translates to our activity, to our seva, to our meditation. It's very difficult in a city when there's so much noise. And they've done some studies, 2 studies recently that are really very interesting. One study they did was they tried to find out what types of music would have different effects on the brain flow, to the beneficial parts of the brain, blood pressure, heart rate. And so they had people with headphones listening to different kinds of music. And this was the purpose of this experiment. And the result of the experiment was something completely different than what they were even trying to do. And it sort of blew their minds, because they found that the blood flow to the good parts of the brain, the blood pressure got lower, all these really good things happened not during particular pieces of music, but during the 2 minutes of silence in between the pieces of music. Isn't that so interesting? It says, and think about this, how often we jump in the car, turn on the music, always try to have noise around us. And they also found that in experiment with mice, that 2 hours a day of silence for these mice, after about 2 hours or during those 2 hours, the brain cells started growing again, multiplying, regenerating. And that mice that had just constant noise, that didn't happen. And this speaks for just sometimes just going within, even when there's a lot of noise, we can still withdraw within. But also I just recommend people when they meditate, get some headphones that they sell here. I think there are some yogis who, I think out of a combination of pride and stupidity, just say, oh, I'm above that, I shouldn't be using props like this. But in fact, these things are helpful. And yes, it's also helpful to go out into the middle of a noisy situation and be calm and still. But we need all the help that we can get. Yogananda was very, very practical in these ways. In the early days, he sold this device that is still crazy in my mind. I can't imagine selling it in the 1930s is what he did. And it was this thing called the Temple of Silence. And it was this contraption that had wires. And these wires went over the top of the head and had 2 earplugs for closing out the noise. And then there was a wire that came out the top of the head, and there was a little spiritual eye that would hang right out there for people to look at. And just he was so creative and so clever, and I think he had a sense of humor about this also. But also he was saying, use all the help that you can get. You cheat. I mean, God is cheating against us. The deck is stacked against us, so use everything that we can to help us. Now, I'll tell 2 stories about 2 kind of roadblocks that people often reach when they start going within more, when they start being silent. And one of them is just the mind itself. We approach it and it's difficult. For many years at Ananda Village, for about the first probably 45 years of Ananda Village, just 1 minute away or even less from on the road going into Ananda Village, there was an old farmhouse, a barn, this big barn, old farmhouse. When I came in 1977, it was falling apart already, and boards were falling off. And over the next 40 years, it just kept getting more and more decrepit until finally the whole roof was half gone, and there was an entire tree growing all the way up through the roof and towering above the building. They eventually put tape around the building as a safety hazard to keep people from going too close. And many people at Ananda just did not like this ugly looking barn because it was an eyesore. But for me, it was like a golden temple for me. And this is why. Because I would travel all over the world. I would travel for 24 hours by air from somewhere on the other side of the world. 5 more hours of driving. I'd come back exhausted. I'd come all the way driving from San Francisco Airport and approach Ananda Village. And I would see that barn. And I knew when I saw that barn that Ananda was just on the other side of that barn. Less than a minute on the other side of that barn. And my heart thrilled every time I saw that barn. It was so ugly, decrepit, and run down. It's gone now. It just finally fell over and they tore it out. But in this reading from Whispers from Eternity, Yoganandaji says, God is just behind your thoughts. And so many of us, when we get still in meditation for the first time and we start seeing our restless thoughts, it can be daunting because it seems difficult. We see a lot of restless thoughts that we never saw before. A lot of them are as funky looking and run down as that barn looked, and maybe we just don't like these thoughts, and some of them are just restless and this and that. But realize how many, maybe hundreds, thousands of lifetimes it's taken you to journey to that point of stillness where you even approach that point of calming down enough to start to see all these restless thoughts that you have. And you're almost there. I mean, you're just less than a minute away compared to this long 24-hour journey relative to how long we've been struggling for many lifetimes. So when you're meditating and sitting and you're having these restless thoughts, just remember God is just behind those thoughts. And if you just calm and relax, let those restless thoughts settle down in the stillness and silence, you're very, very, very close. And I have seen this many times in my own meditation and sadhana, and I think many here have too. So don't get discouraged by restless thoughts. Almost take heart. You're almost there if you just go a little bit deeper and a little bit further. Now, another story I'll tell it's another frog story. Jayaji told a frog story today. And this is another roadblock that sometimes people hit. When they get beyond those restless thoughts, they get calm, they start to feel expansion, and they just get a little bit frightened. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people who told me they had a really scary experience in meditation. And I asked them to describe it, and it's all about seeing the spiritual eye and feeling great expansion and bliss and joy, and they freaked out. It was like, oh my God, I'm going to die, is what they thought. And the ego maybe to some extent was going to die, but it was actually the kind of experience that many of us would die for, to have that experience. And this frog story, I was working, at this time I was on Swami Kriyanandaji's staff at the Crystal Hermitage at Ananda Village. And we had just built this, he had built this large garden, beautiful gardens and a swimming pool from an inheritance that he received from his father. And he built it generously, mostly for the Ananda community. And he would also use it, but it would also be used by all of his friends. And right away, this large swimming pool, frogs started moving in to that swimming pool. And they would come there in the evening, and they would start croaking. And they were so loud. And they were tiny frogs. They were only this big, but they were so loud. And Swamiji called me, Devarshi, these frogs are really starting to annoy me, and we got to do something about these frogs. He said, can you do something about it? And it was up to me to do something about it. So I became really, really expert at hunting and catching frogs. And these frogs, they were really tiny. They were really fast. They were really slippery and slimy in your hands. And so I learned how to go out at night with a flashlight, a torch, when it was dark, and shine it in the right way, sneak up on them, and move my hand really, really slowly, and then grab onto them. Most of the time they would escape. And even when you caught them, they would slip right through your fingers, because frogs are really, really slimy creatures. There was one frog that was really hard to catch. It just was always getting out. Finally, one day I caught him, and I would put it in a jar. I couldn't kill these poor creatures, so I would put it in a jar. And as I was putting it in the jar to take away, he just kept trying to get out, and I kept having to try to keep it. And finally, I put the lid over the jar, and he almost got out at the last minute, but I finally got him in the jar. And then I took him over to this large pond all the way on the other side of the community. And this large pond had really big frogs. These small frogs made this really loud, piercing, high-pitched croak. But this pond had bullfrogs, which are like this big, and they have this really rich, sound and really resonating. But it was also a very, very large pond. And so I brought this jar to the pond. I screwed the lid off, and I just wanted to be gentle and easy on the frog and not just throw him out there or anything. So I put the jar on the bank so he could just kind of go downhill. He didn't even have to go uphill, down this slippery glass and out to freedom. And this frog, I swear, he took about 5 steps to the very lip of that glass. He looked out. He saw this huge pond. He heard these big frogs. He turned right around and just crawled right back up to the bottom of the jar. And this is a hurdle that we face. We start to feel expansion, freedom. It seems really big, and it can be a little scary the first time you experience such expansion. And I have seen that with people who have this experience, that you get used to it and you realize that it's nothing to fear at all. In fact, it's a good thing. And once you enter into it and embrace it, then you start to experience that expansion of the self, of the little self, is not death of the little self. It's actually growth and expansion and becoming part of something greater rather than staying something very small inside our tiny, tiny little jar. And this requires some depth and stillness of meditation. Swami Kriyanandaji, when he first joined Yoganandaji, He describes in his autobiography, The New Path, what he would do every day. And he said, I would wake up at 4 o'clock every morning. I would meditate for 2 or 3 hours, then have breakfast, and then at lunchtime, and then serve. Lunchtime, meditate another half hour. Then in the evening, meditate with the monks. And then late at night, meditate another couple of hours. And he had this intense fervor and just intense desire to go deep. And not everybody has that much time to be able to meditate. But Swamiji makes very clear that it's not about length of time. Yoganandaji talked about this also. Length of time is good, but far more important is intensity. And Yoganandaji often used that word, intense devotion and intense practice of Kriya Yoga. And Swamiji said this too. 5 minutes of intensity in meditation is much better than 5 hours of just kind of tapping your watch, trying to make it move a little bit faster, thinking that it's stuck and why is this taking so long? And so intensity and length plus intensity is also really, really good. But intensity is the first. And so especially if you don't have a lot of time to meditate, work on developing intensity. And that intensity comes from intense yearning for God, intense devotion. These things get watered down by too much restlessness and too much just listening to music and watching TV or movies or being in too restless of an environment. You'll find that if you can, during the day, have some inwardness during the day, during your work, whether it's just talking to God all day long, even though you still have work to do, whether it's just taking brief pauses during the day where you go very still. But you'll find that if you can do that, that your intensity and that longing does not get diluted and watered down and dissipate. And so all these things work together. Service, meditation, inner practice during the day, environment, but finally find a way to go very still a few times during the day. And it can be very short. You'll find that once you start the practice of meditation, you automatically do develop the skill to meditate. And it does become easier to take those moments of just in a stressful situation where there's a lot of noise, of just going very still for just 1 minute and contacting that place that you go to when you have a deep meditation. This comes with practice, it comes with time. And it's not just from long hours and hours of meditation. It comes from the depth and intensity. So again, just learn from our lesson of our monks, of all of us, practicing some silence every day. Try to add this to your daily practice in some way. And again, I'll just end with what Swamiji says from this reading that Adityaji just read. Include in one's worship daily inner communion with the Lord. God is silence. He must be sought, therefore, in inner silence. God is absolute love. He must be sought, therefore, in the silence of love. God is spirit and thus immaterial. He must be sought above all in the expanding peace of deep meditation. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.